What does a pharmacist do? Well, most people might answer that a pharmacist dispenses the medications that my doctor prescribes. Now, I work with a ton of great pharmacists, and one thing that I don't generally see is excitement about pills in a vial. And this is probably because pharmacists have been trained to do so much more. So what can you get excited about in your community? To find out, let's go beyond the scripts. Hey everyone, welcome back to Beyond the Scripts. I'm your host, Will Tuft with Red Cell Technologies, and today we have two guests joining us. We have Brad Gallagher, who's joining us as a partner at Barclay Damon, as well as Shahida Choudhry down at Palms Pharmacy in Tampa. Thank you guys for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so a little bit of backstory. We recently had the NCPA annual event, which was such a great event. If you missed it, you really missed out. But a really great event. And one of the things that I love about these trade show events is just the time you get to spend with customers and vendors and just industry friends outside of the exhibit hall, outside of the classrooms. And we had this great dinner at where was it? The Pearl in Columbus, Ohio. It's a great restaurant and even better company. And the whole time we were eating dinner, I was like, man, I wish this was just recorded because this was such a fun conversation. It'd be a great podcast. So I was able to talk Brad into carving out some time. I know you got a super busy schedule, so thanks so much. But yeah, we really touched on so many different things at that event. And I'd love to just kind of think about some of those legal blind spots that a lot of our listeners are probably just aren't even aware they're overlooking. We're planning the best Connect ever. Connect 2025 is going to be in Grapevine, Texas this year, June 5th through the 8th, and we have an amazing schedule underway currently. This is going to feature product-specific classes for each of our software. So if you are a PioneerRx user, a BestRx user, a QS1 user with PrimeCare or NRX, this event is going to have something for you. We're also going to have an LTC-focused track and some great business classes, along with some live PioneerRx and live BestRx workshops. We're going to have a fantastic exhibit hall, and as always, some really great times outside of the walls of the show itself. I can't wait to see all of you there in Grapevine, Texas.
There's definitely a lot of things going on generally in pharmacy. I guess with the election just happening, there's probably a lot more uncertainty as to where we're going. But like I said, there's been a lot of legal changes, a lot for the better. There's been some very positive momentum, including just last week in New York, where where I live and reside. And, we had some new laws in New York that are very protective of independent pharmacies specifically, which have been long awaited since 2021, that went into effect last week. They were announced, and hopefully will provide some more protection to pharmacies on contracting and audits and things like that. So that's some very positive news, and we've seen some of that out of some other states, Pennsylvania included, recently. So going in the right direction.
Nice. Yeah. So one of the things I was thinking about on the drive over was that focus on fundamentals. And I remember as a kid, I played so many like neighborhood sports, and me and my friends would always go out and practice trick shots. We would practice, writing plays. We had notebooks full of like football plays. It was all the exciting, fun, shiny parts of the sport that you think about on the drive-in. You think about it in the shower, you think about it away. But if you get to like an organized sport at school, that coach is focusing on, dribbling, on calisthenics, on running drills. Those fundamentals are not what you're thinking about when you're just thinking about, the enthusiastic part of your business at a trade show or a lot of times, when you're driving into the pharmacy. So, what are some of those blind spots that are going to get a flag on the play Like starting looking into the realm of like regulatory compliance and audits.
So a lot of my practice is devoted to assisting pharmacies on PBM audits, credentialing, network enrollments and things like that. And so we do see a lot of, the issues coming up, especially I would say when you're getting ready to enroll, right? And, you've kind of been open 6 months, you're in a heat zone, so you're going to get inspected by a couple of the major PBMs. They're going to come in and they're going to expect you to be able to print out reports for them. And, with regard to how much you've been dispensing, who you've been purchasing from, do you have your licenses on the wall properly? Have you purchased the right refrigerator? We've seen that come up, honestly, a lot in New York recently with Medicaid inspections. Have you gone through your checklist of even setting up the pharmacy right? Are you, going through and complying? Do you know how to print your reports from your software vendor? We've been seeing a lot of issues with that, with, transferred out prescriptions being included in the dispensing reports or claims not, moving into not billed versus being reversed properly. And that's causing, inventory shortages when some of these PBMs are doing their reconciliations. That would be one big issue that I think we're seeing on the enrollment side of things is just, making sure the boxes are checked, making sure you're, and Shahida, I know you can talk about this too, is inventory. Like, are you doing it properly? Are you counting it? How are you doing it? I would say that's one area where we continue to see a lot of mistakes is just purchasing when you're purchasing NDC issues and putting in the correct NDCs. Those are the big ones. And then I would say there's one PBM in particular that is now on their on-sites doing not just a running, when you're enrolling, not just doing a running total, right? Which is what we're all used to when we're doing desktop audits and things like that. But they're now doing point in time inventory checks, right? And so what the point in time inventory check is getting people caught up on is, a lot of pharmacies will build a claim to see if it's covered, particularly if it's a more expensive drug. They may not have it on the shelf on that day, but, they know their primary wholesaler will get that to them, the next day or the day after. And the patient's aware of it. The patient consents, right? Everything's done. All the boxes are checked. But when you do a point in time inventory, it obviously results in a shortage. And, this particular PBM we're seeing in the last few months in particular, denying pharmacies enrollment on partially, at least on that basis. So that's one area where we're seeing a lot of concern. And our bigger concern in 2025 is if that PBM goes to a point in time inventory reconciliation in its audits, that could cause some massive, massive issues for independent pharmacies across the country.
Interesting. Yeah. So, Shahida, you're in a state that is entirely a heat zone.
Oh, yeah, the whole thing.
Yes.
Come on.
The whole thing.
Even though it's 58 today, we're still in a heat zone, okay?
So, yeah, I mean, luckily you have like most, I think, modern softwares are able to generate that as long as you're comfortable with going through those steps. But how does that play into, if you do have a patient that's on like a MedSync program, a lot of times that just-in-time ordering is one of the major benefits. Is that really just kind of a way to throw up yet another roadblock, or what's the point there? And
so early on, I would say year 1 and 2, yes, we did bill, hold it overnight. So hopefully another pharmacy doesn't come in and scoop it up. That was back then. But then we learned from the PBMs that we cannot do that. So now we do reverse it, put it on hold. We have it on order. Then we'll bill it the next day. And the date of service has to be the day that we receive the inventory. So both have to match. So we learned the hard way, year 1 and 2. And then we learned that we have to do it the correct way. So a lot of new pharmacy owners do not know this, and it's not in their playbook that this has to happen. So, you have to fall down in order to get back up and realize what's the right way of doing things.
Yeah. Are you seeing that with like controls only, or are you seeing that across the board
across
with maintenance
the board.
medications?
Also, we have to reverse it It is one of the PBM requirements, but a lot of mail order pharmacies will come in and scoop up that prescription overnight. So a lot of pharmacies they'll bill it the next day saying, oh my God, I ordered it. Oh, I ordered these thousands of dollars, but the prescription's gone now. So that's the risk that we have to take. And then we call the patient saying, hey, reverse it. But anyway, that's another story. But, that's what we have to do. We have to follow the rules. Unfortunately.
Is there any way to mitigate that? Can you keep that prescription, in the system and then reverse it at 11:50 p.m.?
There's nobody here that would do that. But no, we can't. We wish. And then we'll tell the patient, hey, we don't have the prescription anymore. Your mail order pharmacy or whoever picked it up, and then from there we'll have the patient fight for it to bring it back. But, there's nothing we can do on our end except return it back to our wholesaler, which is a great time anyway.
Sure. So one of the other things you brought up at dinner was updating some licenses and your NCPDP. So coming up at the end of the year, is there anything on your radar or, a checklist that you might advise for any of our listeners?
So, this morning we found out that we didn't renew our CSAW. Oops. We renewed our DEA. We did everything, but the CSAWs did not come in our email. So we just kept going. And then today, yay. See, part of the checklist. Got to renew your CSAWs too.
Yeah. So do you have an end of year checklist to help you make sure this doesn't happen?
Yes.
Yeah. Give me some advice on that.
Oh, yes. Of course. Besides CISA, that's every 2 years. Of course, we forgot to do that. But here, I have one is from a PBM. Ta-da! We have to renew our fraud, waste, and abuse every year. But I would say a lot of pharmacies wait until the end of the year to get it all done. And we have to upload it to the NCPDP website, checking everything offshore and all that great stuff. Because I always ask folks, do I have an offshore account? No, I don't. And check the right boxes. That has to be done before the 31st. I know they give us a little leeway in January, but it's best not to. That is one big thing a lot of pharmacy owners do forget to do. And then the big three, they will come back next year sending you hate letters, threatening to dump you. So make sure that you please get that done.
So in addition to that, just making sure your NCPDP, the website and everything else is up to date, with your demographic information, your hours, that those things are updated regularly because, they may do an on-site inspection or your board of pharmacy may come or the DEA may come, and do an on-site inspection. And if your even something as simple as your hours aren't right or your email address isn't right and it's going to spam, things like that, a lot of things are now, communicated electronically or through portals. And so if you're not checking those things regularly, you can miss it and it can cause you a problem. So it's very important. The other thing that we do see coming up occasionally too, especially during on-sites is, have you been doing your monthly OIG exclusion list, reviews? So that is another area that just needs to be done. It needs to be done on a monthly basis. So unless you're using a third-party vendor to do it, you should definitely have someone designated in the pharmacy first of the month. Like, this is what I have to do, like every month. And just kind of have them run through a checklist.
Another one is the cultural competency training. I know one big PBM is requiring that. So now we just did across the board that everybody gets it done. And then we just have a big checklist. That checked off to make sure that we get that done. And then there is another one that is required. I can't think of it right now. Cultural competency, workplace something. There's another one that is required. I can come back with that one. That one is required as well. That has to get done by, I think, another PBM, starts with an H, that requires that.
And from just an employment standpoint, different states also have different employment laws and regulations with regard to training that may not be pharmacy specific, but are specific to employers, such as sexual harassment training or cybersecurity training now. Things like that are becoming more and more common, which apply to everybody.
in regards to state, I know our Board of Pharmacy requires us to make sure that our employees sign off on that they've read the policies and procedures every year. Make sure that we get that signed off because we have a third-party vendor that sends us our sheet and everybody signs off on that. I have my regulatory pharmacist. She makes sure that everybody signs off on that because I have my big policies and procedures book right there, the big one right there. Yeah, fraud, waste, and abuse is a big one for us.
So that's interesting that you have a book right there by you, especially with the small team. I think that employment training is one of those things that, especially in a small pharmacy, it's really easy to say, well, there's only 3 of us. We all know. What are the pitfalls to that logic?
Right. I did start out with, it was 2 of us and now there's 20 of us. So, over the years, okay, hey, you did it. All right, fine. Now we have to make sure. Now we have a regulatory pharmacist that takes care of this, make sure we have our checklist checked off and make sure that we hound everybody to make sure everything is done. And especially when we just hire somebody, we make sure we go through everything with the new hire checklist. And this binder has just everything our board requires and everything else is online. So just so you know, that book, doesn't have much in it. It looks nice.
I agree. I think that's, it's commonly overlooked, especially with new pharmacies. You may have 1 or 2 people. It may not be as important, but as you grow or as you bring on additional staff members, whether it's delivery drivers or cashiers or whatever, having that, handbook is important. Making sure that everybody understands the policies and procedures. I mean, PBMs, when they're auditing you are recoup very easily on you. So your drivers and your cashiers and everybody else needs to know the policy. It can't be just, okay, well, I have the policy, but they don't know what it is. Right? You actually have to do the training. You have to make sure that they understand this is our process. We collect copays at the time of dispensing, right? It can't be, oh, the patient's nice, we'll let her go, we'll just get it next time. Like that doesn't work with the PBM, right? Or, or Medicaid if you're in a fee for service state. So, those are important things. I would say on the hiring too, the new hiring training, make sure you're doing it, make sure you're timely doing it. The other, one of the issues that we see come back with PBM credentialing, especially, is if your pharmacy is employing somebody that came from a terminated pharmacy, or another pharmacy that has what they say serious or significant audit findings, right? And the employee may not even know, right? They may not know because of their position there. They may not have been involved in it. But I know in the employment policies that we draft for pharmacies, that's one of the questions we have the new hire be asked, right? Is, did you work at a pharmacy that was terminated or had serious or significant audit findings? We want to know that. To make an evaluation of whether or not we can hire that person, right? And, what potential that may cause. Now, if they truly didn't know or their position is limited or something else, there may be ways to work around it or to explain it to a PBM. The PBM may be fine. But there's other situations where we've definitely had to go through it and get affidavits and everything else to try to show there was no relationship or no knowledge of what was going on at that other pharmacy. So it's something to keep in mind.
Also, you want to make sure that your new hire has to go through, first thing, HIPAA training. So they're HIPAA-rific, as we call them. Got to make sure they're HIPAA-rific, everybody, just in case.
Yeah, so, one of the fun stories that came up was a new hire and what risk are you bringing with a stranger into your pharmacy? Are you performing a background check? How important is that?
Yeah, I learned the hard way. Now we do background checks. Even, fine. We learned the hard way that we do background checks on everybody now. We did not do it for this one person. And then we found out that there was a lot of arrests and all this great stuff that we let this person go. But we do background checks with a whole big checklist when we hire now. So nothing to worry about now. But we had long stories, which I don't think anybody wants to hear about the fun time. Right, Brad?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. It shouldn't be, we all learn, right? And sometimes we do learn the hard way, right? Especially if you're a new business owner, or you're doing everything for the first time. There is some of that, the school of hard knocks, right? But, it should be step one is, doing your background check, don't just hire somebody because you need somebody. Make sure that they're the right person. Make sure they're qualified for the job. You don't want to you don't want to invest all this money into your dream, right, of running a pharmacy and get it up and running only to have major portions of it taken away or the whole thing taken away because you hired the wrong person, or that person's doing something without your knowledge, or, you may not even know what they could be doing in the background, right, when you're not sitting over their shoulder, right? And that can cause you a lot of problems, not just with PBMs, but with government regulators, the Attorney General's office, DOJ. We've certainly seen rogue employee issues in our practice that cause owners, extreme amounts of money, but damages and potential, criminal actions, depending on what it is. So you really need to vet your employees.
100%. 100%.
Especially, I think so many pharmacy owners specifically, have that servant's heart. They want to help people, and one way to do that is through employment, and I think by nature they see the positive in people, and so you do have to do that due diligence and make sure that you're covering your bases, but. What about a new hire, outside of HIPAA training? I think every pharmacy knows you have to do that. When you think about all of the components involved that present a risk for safety, for the health of the patients, or for your business structure, you have employees that are dealing with hazardous materials, you have controlled substances, you have rental cars or delivery vehicles rather, that are, leaving the pharmacy, under the banner of your business. You have so many different moving parts that can all present a vulnerability that, you've put in so much work to get a foothold somewhere, and then, you can get knocked 5 steps back so easily, it seems.
Yes. When we, you open a pharmacy, we're pharmacists, right? We're not business folks. So we had to fall down in order to get back up. So yes, we have to make sure we protect what we have built. So all this I've learned from other owners as well, that hiring is very important, not to hire just to hire anymore. I'm sorry. Yeah. I'm just, yeah. I'm sorry. I went off on a tangent there. Sorry.
Pharmacists generally, I think, and all the pharmacies that I've represented and, meeting people at conferences, I think you all are, very patient first. And I think you treat a lot of your employees in the same manner of you're very trusting, you're very caring people by nature, right? Because that's part of the job. And so, learning how to do those things as a business and being a business person first, it's hard. It's hard. Even as a lawyer, like we do the same thing. Like you go to law school, you learn the law or, concepts of the law, and then you have to learn the business of law, which they don't teach you. But, I think a lot of it is training, right? Having the proper policies and procedures in place, having protocols as to this is how we're going to do things. And you have to do them this way, right? We can't have exceptions. Or if there is going to be an exception, come to me and ask, right? Or come to my pharmacy manager and let's get approval of that, or the pharmacist in charge, whoever that may be. Go to the top of the chain if we're going to do an exception from our policy, and make sure it's approved, make sure it's documented. This is why we're doing this. And, from a legal perspective and dealing with the contracts or the law, like if you're doing that and deviating, right, from what would be a standard practice, having those documents and understanding why you did it is much better to tell the story. And if there is something that went across the line, like explaining why it was done and the circumstances can help to mitigate those reasons, right? Or tell the story as to why it is and help with a corrective action plan. And if it's not, a systemic issue, like waiving copays for every single patient that comes in that says they can't pay, like if you do it, here and there, and there's a valid basis, or you get the financial documentation to show the person couldn't pay, or, whatever, you collect it, a week later because, look, they just lost their job, that week. Like, I understand, like, they couldn't pay me that day, and I go and get it a week later, but I documented that I talked to the patient about it. This is why they lost their job. We did go and collect it later. Or we put them on a payment plan. They paid, whatever, $10 a week until they got it paid. Like, those things, when we're talking about an audit or, things like that can help mitigate it, and may, in fact, have those findings removed in those circumstances when the documentation is good and you've taken the steps and done what you were supposed to do.
I learned the hard way. Yes, you have to document. I learned the hard way. I had that one example. Oh, I didn't tell you guys about this one. I got a phone call from unemployment, that someone applied for unemployment that worked for me for 4 days. She said she worked for me for 4 months. And she got unemployment, but luckily not, I don't know what money she got, but we documented everything. We supplied all the documentation. See, you'll be proud of me. All documented.
Yeah. And
we sent it off. And then I don't know what happened to her, but she doesn't work for me anymore. Thank God. Document.
I know so many pharmacies that are saying, yeah, but there's only 3 of us and we talked about it, and those conversations 6 months from now are, even if you have a great memory, it's just not the same.
Memories fade, as lawyers, and we're, we teach this internally all the time. If it's not in writing, it didn't happen. From a legal perspective, conversations and memories and things like that fade, but the document, if it's done contemporaneously when it happens, that's always the best evidence, right? And so that's, when you're doing something, when you're, like I said, when you're deviating from a standard practice, or you're interviewing an employee, like, when you're hiring them and they told me this, they told me that, and having that note and having it in their personnel file, or having, you have the conversation with the patient on the phone, right? Your pharmacist should make notes in the profile that what happened that day. Here's what was said. Here's who I talked to. Here's who I talked to at the provider's office about, this medication. This is why we didn't switch it. All those things, that contemporaneous documentation, from my perspective, makes my job a lot easier in helping my client, right? And getting through it. And, Shahida,
Oh, I know. I don't know, Will, I don't know if you know our relationship, Brad and I, we met when I needed assistance in a big audit. So he has helped me through it. And ever since then, well, prior to that, and then he's been helping me throughout, just even answering the most basic question via text, a phone call via text, cheaper, just so you know, everybody. Anyway.
Sometimes faster.
I know, like, faster. Okay, email. He has helped me through so many obstacles that have come my way. Just phenomenal. I would definitely recommend everybody to have an attorney, as a friend as well, but an attorney, especially a pharmacy attorney, just any of the questions that you have. Like, I had a question about a contract that was brought to me. I sent it to Brad. Hey, could you just look at this, blah, blah, blah. And he's like, all right, you're good. So it's always good to have somebody just to run things by, just, so you get the good or the bad. Don't do it. So totally recommend it.
It also helps when you have clients that know that, hey, I need advice, whether it's, from their accountant or from their attorney, but having that team built out of, trusted and reliable vendors for whatever it is, right? Having that list of people, okay, if this happens, this is who I call, right? Or this is who I text in some cases, right? And having that list just to get, even if it's 5 minutes, right? Or whatever it is, just to get that assurance that what I'm doing, like, okay, here's the situation. If I do this, is it right? Right. And having that list rather than doing it or, continuing to engage in a certain practice, like, just run it by someone. If you have a sense that it's wrong, or that it may be questionable, like, or you're implementing something new, like, just get assurance, right? That it's, hey, this is probably okay.
Peace of mind. It's peace of mind, I would say, more than anything. It's just like, okay, all right, we're good. We're good to go,
It's a lot of risk, right? And, when you get into pharmacy in particular, you're purchasing a drug, right? And you're letting that drug go out the door. Once it's gone, it's gone. You can't get it back, right? It's not, it's not a department store where you can, or a car, right, where you can go repo it and then, sell it again. Like
Wow. I'm just joking. Just joking. Oh,
I mean,
I'm joking.
it's gone. It's out the door. You're out, you're out that money. You're potentially out more money because now you're not getting reimbursed for it. Like pharmacy has just a massive, massive risk if you, aren't doing it right. And that can bankrupt you, put you out very quickly. Only a year later, you think you're doing great. And then a year later, here comes the PBM and we want, $500,000 or $1 million back and you don't have it.
Yes, we don't.
Yeah. It's amazing. How many contracts with payers, specifically, pharmacies sign and don't fully understand.
Oh, 100%. We have no idea.
Yeah.
MAC and all this AWP. I mean, I know what it is, but in the beginning, you didn't know what it. And plus, you have no idea that you could try to negotiate, but at least you can try. And I know there's usually no negotiation, but certain contracts there is wiggle room. So that's why you go to Brad.
No, and I'll add to that too. I mean, there is, and there's been some interesting testimony by certain PBMs recently before the federal government saying that their contracts are negotiable, right? They're negotiable sometimes, right? And when I say sometimes, it means, it's usually your reimbursement costs. You're not going to be able to go through the contract that they send you and rewrite their indemnification clauses, right? Or, take out certain things. But there is some ability to negotiate certain things with certain types of contracts. And that should be done, right? I mean, we just had one recently a couple of weeks ago where, we had one client that was told, no, we're not changing any of these terms. We had another client, different location, that we pushed back. And while they didn't accept all the changes, they didn't accept some of the stuff that would have been fair and mutual. They did give them an adjustment on their contract price on the reimbursements. So it made it from a contract that they weren't going to accept to one that they were going to accept because they were getting reimbursements that were at least adequate, right? I mean, not great, but they weren't losing money on everything anymore. And it made it palatable for them. So, I mean, that's with PBMs, but like your other vendors as well, like, we routinely negotiate other third-party vendor contracts. And that's a little bit different. There's more wiggle room on those as far as mutuality. We see more third-party vendors willing to negotiate or enter terms and accept those terms to make them more, at least mutual, not one-sided, but take some of the one-sidedness out of it and have it to be a fair contract.
Yes, definitely. Definitely, I would say pharmacy owners don't ever accept the contract for what it is. Always try to push as much as you can. Because you'd be surprised how some wholesalers, whoever it is, will work with you. Don't just sit down and just roll over.
Definitely don't sign everything.
Yeah.
And that's the common problem we see a lot, is just signing a contract because it's put in front of you. And I have to have this contract because I have to have this vendor or this PBM or whatever. We've seen contracts put people out of business. They've gone from, oh, great, I have this contract. I can now accept patients for these plans. And the reimbursements are so bad. They get tons of volume. They're like, I'm doing great. And then at the end of the year, it's like, how did I lose money? And it's sad. It's a sad story.
How does that happen? Because I think any adult I know who would go buy a car or a house, it's almost a fun part of the process to negotiate and to get a better deal. And it's funny how, like, socially, that is such a part of that practice. And maybe, it's a little bit scary over here. Is it a fear of being rejected and not getting the contract at all? Or is it just a lack of understanding that it is in theory negotiable? Where do you think that separation comes in?
I would say definitely in the beginning when you are a pharmacy owner, you're just like, oh my God, someone gave me a contract and I'm just going to go with it. But I would say with experience, you realize that you have some ground to stand on. And hey, they need you So just push it. I mean, I have one contract with a let's just say a manufacturer that I pushed hard. And yeah, we're doing really well with it because I pushed. And who knew? They were like, whoa, you? I'm like, yeah, I'm going to push. Listen, I'm from Brooklyn. We got to push. Okay. So I did. And, you know, we're doing really well with it. Just, I mean, my WAC -3 is not going to work. So I pushed all the way into double digits and it worked. They agreed.
Yeah.
Nice.
Look, if you never ask, you're going to know. Right. And I think there's a lot of horror stories out there, right? Of, look, they're not going to offer you anything. Oh, I tried that. I was rejected. But, you know, every day is a new day, right? And if you don't ask and you don't push for yourself, you're never going to know. And the worst that they're going to do is say, no, we reject those revisions, or no, we can't accept that price. But, you know, hey, we can do a little bit better here. You know, maybe it's 0.5%, maybe it's 1%. You know, that still matters. It's still real dollars. So, you know, or a real mutuality to whatever the arrangement is. So, you know, if you don't ask, you don't know. And so I would encourage anybody, like, you know, don't be afraid to ask them. You're just going to say, at worst, they say no. They're not going to pull the contract from you. In most cases, they shouldn't be.
Yeah. And is that something a pharmacy owner can or should do on their own? Or, you know, does it help to have, you know, your buying group or your local CPESN luminary or your legal advisor? Is there somebody who has your back in some of those conversations, Shahida?
Besides Brad, I mean, it depends on the contract too. You know, it depends. Like if it's a PBM contract, I'm like, hey, Brad, here, look at this, you know. And if it's a manufacturer contract, I mean, it's usually just one page. That's something that you can, and it's numbers, and it's like, okay, I want this, you know. That one I usually negotiate myself, but definitely, I mean, buying group wise, the big contract, yeah, then definitely with the buying group. And then, you know, if you get pushback, then of course, Brad, here you go, you know. But the buying groups definitely, they're there to support you, really, big time. And also your wholesaler's there too. So it's, you know, you got to talk to them too. They're not your enemies. They're there to help you. So a lot of folks are very angry. Oh, the big three, blah, blah, blah. But you have to work with them. You know, we need them and they need us. So, you know, there is a middle ground there. You just have to talk instead of just yelling. Just talk to them.
I think that's great advice. You know, I mean, being angry in negotiations and yelling and screaming and calling them names. I mean, whether it's, you know, a contract or a PBM audit or an auditor, you know, a lot of the people on the other side are, you know, quote unquote, just doing their jobs. Right. And you have to remember that. And, you know, being respectful of them and being professional, you know, you can have a disagreement and it can be a big disagreement, but you can still be professional about it. And, you know, my experience is that gets a lot more accomplished, you know, for the pharmacy or whoever the client is, than just being angry, screaming, and telling them, we're going to sue you. Because that's what'll happen is you'll end up suing them, and it costs a lot of money, right? And a lot of time. And during that time period of while you're suing them till the end result, if you win at the end, you know, that could be years, right? And so
yeah, nobody wants that.
A lot of times, you know, if it's a small, I mean, say it's a smaller issue, right? You might be able to resolve it. Maybe it's not 100% in your favor, but maybe it's, you know, 50 or 75% in your favor, and you can live with it, right? But the relationship goes on. You're still in good graces, and the next time you ask them for something, they're going to be like, okay, you know, this person they were respectful. They were, you know, well spoken about it. We understand there was a disagreement, but, you know, they're going to be there and willing to talk to you next time. Whereas if you're just constantly yelling at someone else, it's not going to be a good relationship ever. And they're not going to do you any favors when the time comes.
Don't burn any bridges. That's the thing. Don't burn bridges.
Yeah.
There are a couple other spots I wanted to touch on while I have y'all here. What are those before we move on, though? You mentioned having like your protocols and your SOPs. At what point do you have like a guideline or a rule or some factor that says, okay, it's time for us to get this process on paper? I mean, because you're doing repeatable processes every day in the pharmacy. At what point do you say this one needs a standardization that's on paper and signed off on?
Oh, that's a good one.
Or do you just know it when you see it?
Oh, no. I can give you an example. Our shipping delivery department, we have so many moving parts to that, and so many people that are working in that department. We had to make a huge flow chart all over the place. I mean, Jake, one of my pharmacists, he loves that stuff. So we had to put it, and also we have policies as well, but the flow chart is a little easier. That's the cover. We had to, just because there were errors, I will not go into those, but errors that happened, that we had to put it down in writing. And just standard operating procedures now, we had to do that. Just because we had one person in our shipping department, that was great. But now there's 5, there's 6 now. So everybody's doing their own thing. So now everybody's working as a uniform team now. Flowchart.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, having policies and procedures for certain things, especially, operationally, like within your pharmacy, how things flow and how you want things to operate, that's important. And that's very customized to the pharmacy, right? So, if you want things done a certain way and as you grow, you'd certainly need that as more people become responsible. But there are certain policies that you need to know and have in place from day one, right? Like everybody needs to know what your copay policies are, your financial waiver policies. Everybody needs to know, about Caremark's aberrant product list, and if you're dispensing those products or stocking those products, how you're tracking those, how you're going to comply with that, because, Caremark terminates people for it, like immediately. Like you get one breach notice the second time you're done. So like knowing those things right away, having people aware of them from day one, they need to know it. And then, just because there's variations in, the big 3 PBMs as far as their contracts, and they're updated all the time. I mean, Optum, 2025 one's coming. Caremark updates their provider manual every other year, but sneaks stuff in every now and then, right? So when that happens, you need to make sure your staff is aware, okay, if this is a Caremark member, this is what we have to do now for these patients, right? Same with Optum. And so if there's a variation in between the manuals, making sure that you have a policy and procedure on that. If your policy is not uniform, if there's a variation, right, that you're following it. I mean, Caremark, for example, with the bulk purchase notification, right, it has to be, if you want Caremark to accept a bulk purchase during an audit, you have to send them a bulk purchase notification. And if you don't, the likelihood of them accepting a bulk purchase outside of, them making an exception for you or litigation, it's a contractual breach, right? So you have to be careful with that. Your pharmacy has to do it, and that's a Caremark requirement, right? So, whoever's handling your inventory for them, hey, we made a bulk purchase. We have to notify Caremark. Let's do it.
Question for you about the bulk purchase. Just question. So we purchase in bulk, but we use it the next day. So if we bulk purchase is a 30-day, right? We have 30 days. Okay. So like all of us, a lot of us will be purchasing in bulk now before the new year. So we should be informing Caremark in regards to this, because a lot of the price increases happen January 1st.
Yes. That's why, that's one of the reasons why I brought that up, is December is a very timely time to think about, do I need to do a bulk purchase notification to Caremark specifically? Because a lot of pharmacies will buy now because of price increases in January, that you'll have additional December inventory that you may, depending on when that audit time frame comes, right? So if you get a desktop audit with a February start date for Caremark will only go back 30 days, right? So you only get January 1, it won't pick up your December inventory. So unless you did that bulk purchase notification, if your audit's going February to February, you could run into a problem with your December purchases. And so if you're not going to use that within 30 days, or you may need that because if an audit falls February to February, you got to think about that. right? So, and any other time that you make a major purchase because of supply chain issues or something else that you're not going to use within 30 days, you should consider doing a bulk purchase notification. And it's purely a protection. It's a protection for you. You know, whether or not Caremark responds to it, at least you sent the letter, you met your contractual requirement. And so it's going to be harder for them on the backside to say that you didn't. At least you're not in breach.
And where do we find this form? I'm assuming I know where it is, but it's on the web. It's on their website.
So yeah, in the provider manual, there's an address, an email address. It's been changed so you can email them your notification. Now, whether or not you hear back from them, that's a different story. But you know, as long as you have it, you have documentation. Again, put it in your folder so that when you get audited, that you have it, you can pull it out and say, "Look, I sent it. You didn't respond to it. I clearly told you this was a bulk purchase. It should definitely be counted." You should be doing that. And you know, as part of your whoever's doing your inventory management, if you kind of have one of those larger purchases that you don't think you're going to use in the 30 days. Maybe just send it to them as a precaution.
Yeah. And in your PioneerRx software shot under the supplier, there's a documents tab, and that is so underutilized, but that's a great place to store those documents digitally instead of relying on a folder. Really nobody puts anything in that in the supplier documents tab, but you certainly can, and that'd be a great place to keep up with those.
That's actually a great thing to know.
Yeah.
I'll certainly be telling my clients about that for sure. It's always an issue.
I will be using that. Thank you.
Good plug.
Yeah. So one of the things I wanted to bring up, because, you know, in 2024 and 2025, I think there's an online presence for most pharmacies, and a lot of pharmacies are really having a lot of fun, and they're really connecting with a lot of their patients in a super organic, you know, digital conversation that is really fun and really exciting. But, you know, are there any pitfalls, or is there anything to be aware of if you're endorsing a product, if you're, you know, naming a product by brand specifically? You know, is there a relationship disclosure, or is there, you know, claims of effectiveness to worry about? I mean, are there any gotchas that maybe are just blind spots?
All right. So yeah, social media is great. Online presence is great. Websites are obviously helpful at directing your potential patients or your patients to certain things. TikTok is cool. I say, you know, a lot of pharmacists doing some really fun things, right? And getting their brand out there. And that's all good. And that's all fine. And saying, hey, you know, we can get you your prescriptions in an hour or 2 hours, whatever it is. Making claims about certain drugs or certain drugs that you're, you know, you may have a relationship with the manufacturer or something like that. You need to be careful, right? And saying what you're saying about it. You know, I would say particularly right now in the weight loss drugs, or the drugs that are being used for weight loss, I should say, that are not FDA approved for that usage. You definitely need to be careful about that. Be careful about making claims about certain drugs that you may be selling for cash prices. That can become your usual and customary price, right? And that has an effect, because if that's what you're doing, that's what you are entitled to under your contracts with PBMs. So you might be changing your usual and customary rate. So if you're making claims or putting out marketing like, hey, we can sell all these drugs to you for $5 a month or whatever it is, or $5, you know, just be careful about that. It's not, you know, it's something your marketing should be vetted. You shouldn't just necessarily do it unless it's something, you know, hey, you know, something simple, light that you're advertising your pharmacy. That's a little different. But when you're getting into specific drugs or specific pricing information, definitely be extremely careful there.
Yeah. Especially with getting our website accredited, I guess, with Legit Script and NABP, they're very diligent in just combing through your website. So just be careful what you have on your website and who you endorse and what pricing that you have, because we did go through that process with Legit Script. So now we got that checked off now. We didn't know we're not supposed to have certain things on our website, like pricing and all that stuff. So we had to get rid of not a lot, just a couple links we had to get rid of. But on social media wise, I know a lot of pharmacy owners talk about supplement side. So the supplement side is a little bit more safer compared to the prescription side. That's why we stay more on the supplement side and more of the fun side of advertising our brand on social media. And my staff loves to do that. We try to stay on this side instead of this side of it.
Yeah. And if you do have a website, make sure your website's up to date. We have seen that come back several times where pharmacies have out-of-date hours or individuals who may no longer work for them still on their website. Government agencies check the websites, PBMs check the websites, other people check your websites, and if they are inaccurate, it can be used against you. So just be careful, make sure that if something changes regularly, check out your website, make sure it's up to date. If you have portals and things like that on your website, you definitely be taking additional protections to avoid, breaches or ransomware attacks or whatever through your website or your portal. What data you're collecting, how you're collecting it, and how that's accessible. There's definitely been some settlements out there with some large pharmacies on those issues. So,
my God, there's always something.
Always something.
Always something.
So, Brad, we're almost out of time here, but moving into 2025, what advice do you have? Is there a common issue you see if somebody comes to you as a new store? Is there something that you're looking for? Let me see how much of your services I can pry out onto the for our listeners.
Yeah, I mean, we're retained for a lot of different issues at a lot of different times, right? So, we'll help somebody from the actual startup, of getting their contracts in place, their licensing in place. But we also help pharmacies that are already established that may be establishing new parts of their business, right? Or have separate affiliated, I won't call it affiliated, but businesses under common ownership, meaning the individuals may be common, but they may be establishing a new business or a new business model. We help with that and go through that. As far as, 2025 and the predictions for that, I think, I mentioned earlier today, like New York has new laws in place that provide protections for, credentialing, audits, terminations, patient steering issues. So, what Shahida had mentioned earlier, a mail order pharmacy coming in and stealing your patient, not allowed in New York anymore, right? Not that it should have been anyway, but now it's more clear. So I think New York has these new laws, Pennsylvania has new laws. There's a lot of other states that are passing new laws or have new laws pending, or laws that have been passed that are now becoming effective maybe in 2025. And so knowing what your rights may be and using those rights, especially where they override a contract, is helpful. Making sure, I would say in 2025 in particular as well, continuing to work with your state and local representatives, get them to your stores, make sure that they understand your businesses, I think is crucial. I think that's where we're seeing and why we're seeing some of these laws being passed, in people from both sides getting on board with that, and agencies, starting to take up the task of, yes, we're going to investigate a complaint by a pharmacy into this PBM or into this other vendor or whatever, making sure that everyone understands your businesses, I think in 2025, as it should have been in the past, something that should be continued. And making sure your rights are being protected. Laws are great, but if they're not enforced, they're no good.
Absolutely. Shahida, what about walking into a colleague's store? What are there any legal, hey, watch out for this because I've heard or I've seen? Give me one of your one of your targets.
I have three.
Okay. Give me three.
By the end of here, I don't think we touched on the DSCA exemption form that a lot of owners have, a small business and all that stuff. So they got to make sure that they do that. Another thing I know we spoke about was that BOI, right? The IRS form that we all have to fill out by year end. even though, I mean, I'm sure all of you guys have a million LLCs and all these different companies, you got to fill out each one for each one. So that was, I don't know, we didn't get to talk about that because that's on my list of things to do before the year ends. But the updates with the PBMs is big. Like for us, delivery and shipping is all that very important. So all the PBMs update their radii, whatever it is, that and where we can deliver, who can we deliver to, and state lines and all that stuff. So we have to make sure that we stay up to date and don't just assume they're going to give you this information because they don't. Just, things are just not handed to you. You got to go look for it. And they will tell you that you have to do your due diligence to make sure that you, as a pharmacy owner, is going out there to look up this information yourself. So I learned the hard way. Right, Brad?
So yeah, it is definitely in your contracts with PBMs as well as your wholesalers and everybody else that they are allowed to amend your contracts or update their contracts or policies and things like that. And those notifications may come with or without actual notice to you. And what I mean by actual notice is like you get an email saying, hey, these are all the changes that we did this year, right? That would be nice. That'd be helpful. It's not always done. Sometimes it's in a portal and you got to go check for it. You got to go search for it. But again, having somebody designated, especially as you get to a year end, to kind of go through and do that and check your portals, check for updated manuals, check for any notices or updates, because it's also the time of year that we also revise and update our policies and procedures. So, it's a good time to do it as part of that kind of process and year-end checkup, I would say.
Yeah, I love that. Just like you have to have your assigned HIPAA officer, assign a regulatory officer, give them that checklist, keep them on it. So, Shahida, is there anything else on that checklist, legal or otherwise, that you think our listeners are forgetting?
Evaluations. Last thing, make sure that you get them done before the year ends, because I know all pharmacy owners are like, oh, I'll get it done and stuff, but just make sure that you get it done. Just like me, it takes me a month to get it done, but I do get it done. I know that's regulatory, but you document, especially when it comes to your team members. You want to make sure that you document. You sit down with them and you talk to them and come up with goals for next year, which are pretty important. So we do that in December. We come up with goals, we put it up, and then hopefully they meet them.
I would just to add to that too, because this comes up a lot in the employment context, is if you don't have the best employee in the world, don't tell them every year that they're the best employee of the world and then call your attorney in June and say, this person is the worst, like they're awful and I want to fire them today. And then they have 10 years of like amazing superstar reviews. And you're like, well, what changed here? Right. So just be careful about giving glory reviews, right? And exceptional reviews if the person's truly not exceptional. And then 6 months later, you have a change of heart and say that the worst person ever.
Document.
Accurately document. Contemporaneously.
Okay, sorry. Accurately.
All right. Thank you guys so much for joining us. I know you guys have a lot on your plate, so I know it's hard to carve out some time during the day. Also wanted to point out that this was not a paid sponsorship or anything like that, but genuinely enjoyed our conversations that we had in Columbus and just wanted to have you on. So, Brad, if somebody did want to get in touch, how would they go about that?
Yeah, the easiest way is probably via email. My email address is B and then my last name, Gallagher, Gallagher, at barclaydamon.com. I'm also on LinkedIn. You can find me through my name and the firm, Barclay Damon.
And Shahida, everybody knows where to find you on social media. Down at Palm Pharmacy. Very active on social media. I'm sure if you don't know Shahida, then welcome to the industry.
Yeah, always doing fun stuff.
Wow. Okay. All right. Calm down.
All right, guys. Thanks for joining.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. Yeah, it's great.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Beyond the Scripts, presented by the Catalyst Pharmacy Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please support our channel by liking, subscribing, and clicking the notification bell so that you'll be notified anytime we post new content. To stay up to date with all of the latest independent pharmacy news and content, follow PioneerRx on your preferred social media platform.